ora koutou. Ko Sally McLennan toku ingoa. My name's Sally. I'm an English teacher and a poetry lover. That's my credentials for being here. I'd like to really introduce Chris to you. This is Chris Tees. So Chris is the Poet Laureate of New Zealand, 2022 to 2025. His first collection, How to Be Dead in a Year of Snakes, won the Jessie Mackay Award for Best First Book of Poetry. The collection revisits the 1905 murder of Joe Kum Yung at the hands of the racist Lionel Terry. His second book, SO MASC, in capitals, explores the themes of identity, sexuality and pop culture. Yay. It received critical acclaim and was included in the New Zealand Herald's Best Books of 2018 and the Spinoff's 20 Best Poetry Books for 2018. His most recent collection of poetry, Supermodel Minority, which is on the easel, ta-da, was longlisted for the Mary and Peter Biggs Award for Poetry at the 23 Ockhams, and was a finalist for the Gay Poetry Award at the 25th Lambda Literary Awards. Is that correct?
Yep.
And with Emma Barnes, Chris co-edited Out Here, an anthology of takatapui and LGBTQIA+ writers from Aotearoa. And you're the editor of the Friday poem on the Spinoff.
Yes, but I'm finishing up next month.
Oh, still
currently the editor. Yep.
Te Pohuaki National Librarian Rachel Essen described Chris's appointment as Poet Laureate as recognition of a poet leading a generational and cultural shift in the reach and appreciation of poetry in Aotearoa. Did you know that? She said that?
I did know that.
So welcome to Marlborough and welcome to the Marlborough Book Festival.
Thank you,
It's
Sally.
lovely to have you here. You've been in the role for a couple of years, but congratulations on your appointment. And you've got your name on a pretty impressive list, and you're so young. Are you the youngest one?
I am, yes, youngest to be appointed in the role. Yep.
Awesome. Well, did you imagine that would happen so early in your...
Oh, absolutely not. I knew there was a little bit of a campaign to get nominated. People were nominating me for the role, but I didn't think I stood a chance. But I thought that it would be good to have your name at least in front of the committee. But I got the phone call and I couldn't believe it. I remember crying straight away. And that's when I realized, wow, this is actually something that I think I really want and means a lot. Yeah. Rachel, the National Librarian, when I met her for the first time, said that they're trying to change the perception of the role, that they don't want it to be seen as like a gold watch award, where people get it pretty much at the end of their career. And, before me, there was David Egerton and Selena Tusitala-March, who are both also, I'd say mid-career, but still doing amazing things. So I think it's sort of, changing who can be Poet Laureate. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so what does it mean to you?
So I started writing poetry and there weren't many Chinese New Zealand people being published. There weren't many queer writers sort of receiving the attention that they deserved. So for me, this was a really huge opportunity to sort of represent those camps, to sort of show people that a poet of Chinese or Asian descent can ascend to this sort of lofty position, and also, to sort of represent the queer community and the queer writers who have sort of come before me and have sort of set the scene for me being able to step into the role as well. Yeah.
And what have you got there in your hands?
So this is my toko toko. So each Poet Laureate gets one made especially for them. So Jacob Scott, who is an artist and sculptor in the Hawke's Bay, he's made every single toko toko for each laureate. We had a chat about what mine might look like, and so what he does is he sort of talks to you about your life story, your whakapapa, and tries to incorporate that into the piece. So he actually found the bone component of it in Indonesia a very long time ago, and when it came to sort of figuring out what to give to me, he asked if I'd be okay with this being the base of it, and I thought, yep, that sounds good. And then he's added this piece of ponamu in the middle of it, and he found this in the Hawke's Bay when they were doing the cleanup after last year's cyclone early in the year. So because the role originated in the Hawke's Bay, I really love the fact that there's this sort of piece from there that sort of connects me to the place. So and this is mine to keep. I keep it in my bedroom, leaning against my dresser. So I wake up and I see it every morning, and that's my reminder that I'm the Poet Laureate. Because sometimes I do forget, and it's sort of like a weird thing to say to people. I've had I ran into a friend's dad who I hadn't seen for maybe 15, 20 years, and he asked me what I was doing, and I said, I do this as a day job, but I also write poetry. And he asked me, so are you published? And I kind of had to take a moment. I was like, I should just say, I'm the current Poet Laureate.
Yeah. Don't you know who I am?
Yeah, well, but the thing is, for a lot of people, they don't know who the laureate is, and it's a bit of a weird thing. But I think for me, being able to say it and actually tell people is a big part of cracking the imposter syndrome that I've sort of been feeling about it. Especially, back to your original, question, seeing my name at the bottom of the list of all who've come before me. People like Bill Manhire and Jenny Bornhold and C.K. Stead, Vincent O'Sullivan. People that I read and studied and admired, or who have been my mentors and teachers, and then suddenly there's me, and I feel I feel like I don't belong there yet, but I've just got to work through that.
Yeah. So what's a day in the life of a Poet Laureate? So what sort of things are they wanting you to do? Is it a lot of writing, a lot of reading?
Yeah, so the Poet Laureate role only really has two strands. One is to write poems, and the other is to promote and advocate for poetry. And each laureate can step into the role and sort of do whatever they want to fulfill either. I have been mostly doing the promoting and advocating for poetry sort of side of things, doing a lot of festivals and events and school workshops and visiting groups that are also outside of the literary sort of ecosystem. So getting to introduce poetry to people who don't necessarily read it or sort of know much about what's happening in contemporary New Zealand poetry. So for me, that's sort of the really cool stuff, because it helps to demystify what poetry is and what it can be. I've been doing a little bit of writing. One of the things that I've tried to do is sort of have a new poem to read at events. I've also been asked to write a lot of poems for gallery openings and things like that. But I haven't really sort of had the time to just sit down and work on a new book or anything like that. It's sort of been busy with everything else going on. Plus, there's a lot of admin. There's so much
You've already
email.
mentioned that, so it must be a lot.
Yeah.
So how did you discover poetry personally? Did you have a sort of Dead Poets Society type teacher at school that was like, hey, let's get into it?
Yeah. So I went through the schooling system, and like a lot of people, we were set poems to read and study. I've always been very, very grateful that I had some of the best English teachers I could have had. They were the ones.
We are great.
The English teachers are the best, and I got to speak at the New Zealand Secondary Schools English Teachers Conference, and it felt like coming home and hanging out with all the cool aunties and uncles of the high school system. So I studied poetry at school. I had a lot of English teachers who were very encouraging with sort of getting people to write their own work as well. But the thing that I guess got me into poetry a bit more seriously was my friends were writing their own poems and bringing them to school and sharing them amongst themselves at lunchtime. So kind of like a little makeshift writing group.
Yeah.
And because I wanted to hang out with my friends at lunchtime, I thought, now I have to write poems.
Yeah.
So I started writing poems and started bringing them to school, and we'd share them with each other. And when it started to get to the point where I had to decide what I wanted to do at university, I knew I wanted to do English. That kind of was a no-brainer for me. But I learned that you could actually go to university and do creative writing workshops where you write poems and you share them and you talk about them. And then later on, you could potentially do a master's in creative writing, which is a full year of just, concentrated writing and study. So I kind of made a goal to sort of get into a creative writing workshop and then maybe get into the masters. And so that actually set me on the path of writing poetry and taking it more seriously. I was also doing a lot of open mics and things like that. And that was exposing me to a whole other form of poetry that we weren't seeing at school or at university. So starting to really build this appreciation for what's out there and why people write poetry and why they feel compelled to share it. So that really sort of kept motivating me to keep at it and to, maybe one day get a book published. And
Here we are.
here we are.
Yeah. Well, have you got one you'd like to share with us?
Yeah, sure.
Fantastic.
I'll read the opening, the sort of opening poem from Supermodel Minority. This is a poem that I think brings together a lot of the themes of the book, as well as sort of what I've been writing about over the last 10, 15 years. And it was inspired by an essay written by a US poet called Chen Chen. And he wrote in that essay, "I wish the racism were not so predictable." So this is a poem called Wish List. I wish I didn't feel compelled to write about racism, but there it is, patrolling my everyday thoughts like a mall cop drunk with power. I wish people didn't ask me how to solve a problem like racism, as if it is a cloud they cannot pin down. I am not an expert spokesperson holding an elusive truth. I wish I could predict when racism would exit stage right, to wherever bad things go to die rusty, non-biodegradable deaths. But I can't predict the death of something with a robust business continuity plan that involves moving from host body to host body. I am not an exorcist. I am a sympathetic vomiter. Is it predictable for me to write this poem? I suppose so. What I really want to write about are things with promise, to offer up whiskers on kittens when the outlook is for Nazis upon Nazis. I wish I could sing my way out of this while the man I love applauds from the front row, our adorable Jack Russell Terrier Rocket sat by his feet. I wish I could start a love poem with a line like, "He thumbs me like the Oxford Dictionary," and consider it a job well done. I wish I didn't always feel this way, always tired of explaining why I am tired, and why writing this poem is more need than want. I never felt the need to be the gunshot during a knife fight until they told me there was no such thing as let's finish this once and for all. I realize now nothing is ever truly finished. I get knocked out, but I am a flashing corpse regenerating in a video game with limited credits. I guess there's always the pull of more to do, flags to fly, and words to scratch into the world's longest stretch of wet concrete. I guess what I'm saying is, I am not done with snakes and wolves. I am not done with feathers or glitter on the roof of my mouth. This is me begging for a fountain to take all my wishes. This is me speaking a storm into my everyday.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And you're referring to your snakes and your wolves?
Yeah. So How to Be Dead in Your Snakes, the first book, and then there are a lot of wolves that sort of run through SO MASC. And I didn't set out to sort of write this book as the third book of a trilogy, but
that's one of my questions.
Oh, but that's kind of ended up what I did. Because the first book is about the past, the second book is sort of about like the present and coming to terms with who I was, or who I am as a gay man, and then this book is sort of looking to the future, and so it kind of all just neatly fell into place. Yeah,
awesome. You spoke a little bit about open mic and getting out there into the poetry scene, and Rachel Essen said that you were leading a generational and cultural shift. So I wanted to ask you, what do you see the literary landscape in New Zealand as now, and what do you want it? What do you want for it?
Yeah. So when I started writing and publishing, back in the early noughties, mid noughties, as I sort of mentioned before, there weren't that many Chinese New Zealand voices or Asian voices being platformed. There were queer writers, but they weren't necessarily being read as queer writers or promoted as queer writers. It sort of was that sort of thing that they just wanted to sort of hide. So I sort of think about that time of my writing career and what's happening now, and it really inspires me and makes me hopeful that there are so many young, diverse people who are not only writing but also finding ways to get their work out there. So whether that's publishing in sort of the more established journals and publications, or getting up at open mics and sharing their work. The spoken word and open mic scene has really taken off in Wellington, especially for young people and with young people, because they do see it as a valid outlet and channel for them to be able to talk about what worries them, the state of the world, and what they hope, for the world. And I've always believed that you should listen to young people because they are the ones that are hopefully going to make the change that will actually benefit them and shape the world into what they want it to be. So it's been really wonderful being able to go to high schools and talk to students and hear that they actually read contemporary New Zealand poetry and can name contemporary New Zealand poets. And I, at their age, would never have been able to do that because we weren't necessarily exposed to that sort of work. And, I didn't actually really come across it until I started going to university and reading sort of a little bit further into the canon. So yeah, that really gives me hope. And I think it's to do with a lot of social media, making poetry a little bit more discoverable and accessible. I used to have to order books from the States. I still do, but, it was hard to actually find the work that I was sort of hungry for. Whereas these days people can sort of stumble across a poem on social media that someone shared. And, that sort of then opens the floodgates and gets them discovering the poets that will actually speak to them and sort of they can relate to.
Yeah, I feel like I've got more access to poetry than I've ever had through social media. And
I think a lot of English teachers that I've spoken to and have had conversations about this, they themselves also feel like they're a bit more empowered to be able to bring other voices into the classroom and say, hey, if you like that, then you should, investigate this area of poetry. Yeah.
And then the students are bringing us the poems as well, which is really cool.
Yeah.
Yeah. Awesome. So I've got your 3 collections here. I love the covers. I don't know if everyone in the audience has seen them, but they're pretty cool. Oh, goes that way. So I was going to ask you if they were a trilogy, but you've kind of already answered that. So your first collection, How to Be Dead in a Year of Snakes, you've written about the murder of gold miner Joe Kum Yung. What drew you to that particular event as a subject?
So it was 2005 and I was doing my master's in creative writing at the International Institute of Modern Letters up at Vic, and sort of writing these poems about my great-grandfather coming to New Zealand and the history of Chinese New Zealand. And so 2005 was the 100th anniversary of the murder of Joe Kum Yung. And this is a moment in our history that was relatively unknown. Not many people, it's definitely not studied at school. It was a bit of a dark time, and I know a lot of Chinese people didn't want to talk about it because of what had happened. But there was a group in Wellington who wanted to acknowledge it and wanted to sort of raise awareness of it because it kind of did reflect where we've come from in terms of New Zealand's history with racism and anti-Chinese and anti-Asian sentiment. So there was a lot of activity to sort of get it into the media. There was also a reenactment of the murder in Haining Street, which is where it took place. And so that's when I first came across the story. And there was something about it that just really grabbed me. Like it was a moment in time that kind of encapsulated what it was like to be Chinese in New Zealand. So all of the anti-Chinese legislation that was passed, how they were treated. And it kind of opened up this conversation of like, well, we don't like them, but, should we be shooting them in the middle of the street? And, what has always gone to me is that the person who did it, Lionel Terry, was always like, he was the one whose story was told. And Joe Kum Yung was the footnote. And I wanted to sort of flip that on its head. So I read into Joe Kum Yung, how he came to be in New Zealand, and started writing these poems about him. I've actually been going back and looking at those earlier poems because this year is the 10th anniversary of that book. So I'm sort of like putting some material together to sort of celebrate it. And the poems themselves changed a lot over the 9 or so years before it actually became a book. So it started off as just a handful of poems. Then I thought maybe it just needs to be one long poem. Then it sort of shrunk down again. And then I kind of realized, I think this is a book in itself. It needs to be told. And the book is about the murder. It sort of takes that as one of the starting points. But it's also a book about legacy and memory and history, like who gets to actually record history and talk about it. and also bringing in aspects of like Chinese funerary rites. You know, what do we do to honor the dead, especially just after the past? You know, how do we ensure that they are given a safe journey to the next afterlife? So I wanted to bring all of those threads in to sort of like flesh out the story, so to speak. And that book came out in 2014, and you know, I've been very fortunate that that book has taken me around the country, around the world. Sort of shines a light on that particular moment in history, and gets people talking about like where we've come from and acknowledging that, you know, we have to talk about the hard, difficult parts of our past, because that's the only way we actually get to learn about how we're going to deal with what's happening now.
Yeah. And I find poetry is a great way to learn history, because you're getting the perspective that you're not necessarily getting in the history books.
Yep.
And I feel like poets have been doing that for a long time.
Yeah, and like, I guess this was quite ambitious as a first book, because it is like a book-length sequence, and it does have a bit of a narrative, you know, because it sort of takes aspects of what happened in the story. So I've had a lot of people talk to me about how it's one of the first poetry books they've actually read from cover to cover, because of that format and because of that form. It sort of is a gentle way into the poetry as well. They don't have to sort of look at it as like, I don't understand this poem, but when they sort of know that it's part of a bigger story and they know what that story is, it just unlocks a lot of it for them. Yeah.
You didn't want to read anything out of it today?
I will actually.
Okay.
I used to, I read a lot of it when I was promoting it when it first came out, and I sort of, you know, would get given like 8-minute slots to read. And I'd read like 8 minutes of poems from the book, and I'd realize, oh God, it's so brutal to talking about a hate crime and a murder for 8 minutes. But it is a book that I, over the years, like my own relationship with it has changed quite a bit. And, you know, there's points where you sort of look back on your early work and you think, oh, but I think I'm starting to learn how to appreciate this book again. Yeah. So I'm going to read a poem that's sort of towards the end of the book. What I did was I wrote a poem where I kind of interviewed Joe Kum Yung, and then another one where I interviewed Lionel Terry. And because I was trained also as a scriptwriter and thinking about like acts, I thought, I need a third one. And there wasn't another sort of historical figure or character that I could write or interview about. So I decided I was going to interview light. So this is the poem in which the author interviews light. I am not petulant. Like you, I am merely hopeful. Where shadows bleed must lie a source of light. Light is warm and sure of its place in every widescreen vista, or on a stage where it unfolds each scene. Light is proof that something is happening right before you. I am the eye. I am the thought of least resistance. After belief, I make myself visible, a golden loose thread. I can be trusted. Just watch. This will move them. Here's where the body fell. No, wait. Over there. There are so many ways to begin, I often confuse myself. Old age has worn my edges down. Nothing catches, nothing drags me through a life of usefulness. Sometimes I can't decide where the story truly starts or where to place their marks. Each event that punctuates the arc carries its own intention, as does each storyteller's tongue, laced with favour and prejudice. Mine is to seek out the tension and violence in their vibrating hearts. Let me start over. 1905. This is the end. We meet again. Same street, same sky. At first blush, the man falls down and stays down. Language and music fleeing his body, freed from the limits of flesh and bone. From here, the world extends into white, and the voices of the living carry nothing but death. If I could speak, all you'd hear is echo. Over here. No, over here. There. Passing through each version like a tragic round. Thank you.
It must be pretty exciting to have had that out for 10 years, though.
Yeah, it's it's a milestone, and what also feels sort of really special to me is that it's a book that is still being read and talked about and studied at university and high schools. That's the thing that sort of is unbelievable. Like, I never expected my work to be written about or read about in that way, and it's really lovely to hear students come to me and tell me about like how they've studied it in high school, because it's the way for them to sort of unpack that part of our history through a different medium.
I noticed you use a lot of different, your poems are quite varied in their form and their length and things like that. I guess my question's a bit of a nerdy one. Form for you. Is it something that you do purposely, or does it happen as it happens? Or
it's a funny thing, because you can sometimes go into starting a poem and knowing, right, this is kind of what I want. But for me, the great mystery of writing is actually uncovering that as you write. So for How to Be Dead in a Year of Snakes and a lot of my early poems, I think I was consciously trying to write against form. And that might have been like young poet trying to resist traditional forms and sort of trying to break from that particular expectation of what a poet does. So a lot of the poems in How to Be Dead in a Year of Snakes and earlier are quite sort of fragmented, use a lot of white space, because I'm quite a visual person as well, so I really wanted to sort of play around with how a poem looks on a page. And often when I talk to people who are a little bit curious but also scared of poetry, when they see a poem like that, it does sort of make them question, why is this a poem? Why does it have all this sort of white space? Why is it broken up in this way? And that's a really useful way to get them talking about, like, or getting to talk to them about, like, well, what do you think? How would you approach this? So I found it as, visually, it can be quite a useful tool to sort of just break down the barriers of how people approach poetry. I found, though, that as I've sort of started writing more and more and more, I do turn to form a little bit more than I did in the past, because there's something about it that can be quite liberating if you want to use the form but also subvert it in some way and sort of take it apart and recreate it in a new way. I found, especially in the past couple of years being Poet Laureate, writing in form has been useful, because if I've been asked to write a poem quickly and I don't know how to start, I'll just think, right, I'll use a form, and then at least that's one less thing I have to worry about, and I can just go straight into sort of getting the words out. And then, afterwards you can decide whether or not to keep it in the form or to break it apart and do something completely different with it. But for Supermodel Minority, there's a lot of really dense prose poems. And the reason why I chose that was because I wanted to literally take over the page. I wanted to fill up space. I wanted to claim the page for my own use. So I wanted to write these really big, dense prose poems that take up the entire page, because I also wanted the reader to feel overwhelmed by it, because a lot of what that book is talking about is really overwhelming stuff. So that's how I use the form to sort of get the reader to also feel the same sort of pressures and the same claustrophobia in some sense. Yeah.
I do want to talk about Supermodel Minority. I went on a bit of an emotional roller coaster reading that. I'm really angry, but then I'm laughing my head off at the other end. Well, mostly at the other end. And it's beautifully, I mean, you can tell us all about it, how you've decided to structure that text in the 3 parts. Could you tell us a little bit about that?
So after SO MASC, I didn't think I would sort of have a book ready, soon. I thought, no, I'm going to take a little bit of a break, because I was actually kind of writing and finishing How to Be Dead in a Year of Snakes and SO MASC at around the same time. And then I started working on Out Here with Emma. So I already had quite a bit going on. But then lockdown happened with COVID, and I sort of found myself with a lot of spare time and reading a lot about the rise of anti-Asian sentiment again because of COVID-19. And that just sort of kick-started something in me, and it got me angry again. So I thought, okay, I'm going to write this book, I'm going to write these poems that are about tackling this racism that seems to just hang around. It sort of dips out for a bit, but it comes back in, often wearing a new mask, but it's the same old thing. So the book was very much about me trying to articulate and figure out all of that stuff that was going on. At the same time, I was also wanting to write poems that celebrated my Chinese heritage and talked about my family history and how that intersects with being queer and all that sort of stuff. So I had sort of had these two angels and a devil on my shoulder sort of fighting it out, like, no, you should be more angry, or no, you should be more celebratory. So that's kind of like where the book comes from. As I kind of alluded to, like, Snakes is a book that I'm super proud of, but reading from it was quite hard. So I decided for SO MASC, I really wanted to write funny poems and like jokey poems that sort of talked about my love of Madonna and the musical Grease. I wanted to pull those parts of myself into it because those are the things that got me through being a teenager, an angsty teenager, and have formed who I am today. So Supermodel Minority sort of takes that too and sort of adds more of it. There's poems about George Michael. There's poems about a lot of gay artists that I really admire. So I sort of wanted to celebrate and honour them as well. So the book is this really sort of contradictory sort of feel about being angry with the world, but also wanting to celebrate it. And for me, celebrating joy and holding joy up as a way of holding on to hope, I think, was very important to ensure that the darkness of the book didn't completely take it over. Because I love funny poems. Like, for me, they are some of the most memorable. And especially with people who don't really like poetry, when you read them a funny poem or share a funny poem with them, it disarms them a bit, and they think, I didn't know poetry could have jokes. It's like, poetry can do whatever it wants to do. So I really just wanted to just have a little bit of fun with it as well and just be a little bit of an idiot.
There's a very funny one in there. I had to read it to my husband. What's funny until it...
What's fun until it gets weird.
What's fun until it gets weird. You should read that, everyone. It's probably not appropriate to read in here. You can read it if you want.
I won't read it because it's quite long. But that poem came out of me playing a game called Cards Against Humanity with my mum. If you know, you know. And then having to explain some new words and terms. So the poem itself is pretty much like 95% true. And it's really funny because that poem was mentioned practically every single review of the book. And it is a poem that I've read at a few events, often later in the evening once everyone's had a few drinks and we're like, right, we're just going to go there. I was sort of in two minds about including it in the book, but I think in the end I was like, no, this is a really funny, joyful moment from my family. And after the sort of like this sort of more serious heartbreaking moments that I put into SO MASC, I thought, no, this needs to be here just to redress the balance of it. My mum is horrified that it's in the book, but she does have a little chuckle about how it's sort of taken off.
So when you put it together, are you thinking about how your readers are going to be feeling emotionally as they go through it? Because I don't really know how a collection of poetry gets put together. How do you do it?
Well, I guess, poets want their readers to experience something. They want to move them. They want them to think about something or feel different about something. So, I think going into putting a poetry collection together, it's about that arc or that journey that you want to take the reader on. For this particular book, I think there was like sort of three very distinct groupings of poems. There was the poems about the racism and the state of the world. There were the poems that were sort of about joy and hope and all my influences. And then in the middle, sort of separating those two, is a sequence about the rainbow flag. So the original rainbow flag has 8 colours, and each colour was ascribed a meaning. So what I wanted to do was just sort of experiment with writing a poem about each of those colours using what they were meant to stand for. So the sequence itself isn't necessarily about the flag, but sort of vibes off all of those different meanings and colours. And it's a bit of a weird, I guess, philosophical sort of sequence of poems. It sort of examines everything from like visiting Iceland, contemporary art that plays with colours. There's a poem in that sequence that is about time and history and memory. So yeah, I just wanted to sort of like use that as a foundation for this particular sequence. And I don't know, maybe this, often it's just like chance and luck that when you have those sort of groupings, it just sort of works. And you think, oh, okay, I didn't really have to play around with it too much or over-engineer it. SO MASC originally actually started off as a two-part book. One was side A and the other was side B. But my publisher decided that it didn't work. Well, it said that it didn't work. So we sort of found other ways to sort of reorder the poems. And in the end, I thought, actually, it also feels like this book is a bit like a diary. So I thought, let's just have all the poems in one long sequence. Because you never know how people are going to read a book of poetry. I guess with something like Snakes, they know that it is a book-length sequence, so they sort of approach it in that way. But often people just dip in and out of a book, and you kind of have to accept that when you're putting a book together, that they're not necessarily going to like read it from start to finish and get all of those points. But I think because I'm a little bit of a nerd, not a little bit, I'm a big nerd. I like to have those sort of recurring motifs and images and lines throughout a book, because it's almost like a treat for the reader if they do read it from start to finish. Yeah.
And are you doing other types of writing?
I mean, I've sort of dabbled in a bit of short fiction, and I write a few essays now and then. That's the sort of the thing that has been on my mind. Like after the next book of poetry, I would like to branch out into a different genre or form. I'm just not quite sure how I'm going to do that. I have a friend who is an essayist but is currently trying to write her first novel, and it's been really fascinating talking to her and listening to how she's finding it difficult shifting genres and forms, because a lot of people assume, oh, once you write that, then you should be able to write whatever. It's like, no, it's like playing different types of sports in a way. Like you've got similar skills that sort of get applied to them, but there's different technique, there's different equipment. So for me, it's sort of like stepping back out of my comfort zone again, and sort of trying to play around with different things and sort of strengthen my muscles as a writer.
Awesome. I'm looking forward to seeing what you come up with. I suppose when you've
Me
got
too.
a bit more time, when you've got a bit more time when you finished your laureateship, you might be able to get into that kind of thing. I want to talk about Out Here, but I wondered if you wanted to read another poem for us first.
Okay.
If you've got one there.
I'll read a poem from Supermodern Minority again. This is from the third section. So there are quite a few poems in the book that sort of have this recurring title format, which is something for the end of the world. So this is Love Theme for the End of the World. He thumbs me like the Oxford Dictionary until he finds what he's looking for. To find the definition of love, the eyes must hover over every new feeling before moving on. The first time he broke my heart, I thought he was rejecting what I meant to him. Love is pain, oh, 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 sang Girls Aloud on Out of Control, 2008, their last album before taking a hiatus, which is pop music euphemism for breaking up. It's good to see yourself in pain, even if you refuse to believe that's what your voice really sounds like, even if you refute that shadow cast over your face in the last photo of the two of you taken together as together. We can make sense out of anything if we're given enough time, enough for two to find their way back to each other, to invent a word and keep it between them. My scattershot approach to loving him was pulling apart every half-finished love poem until I found what I was looking for, meaning where there was no meaning, or our history reduced to 1,000 paper cuts. My favourite type of gay porn is when two men talk about their lives day and nobody dies. When I was 15, the internet moved like honey, slow but with a sweet return. Nowadays, frustration is a photo of two men holding hands censored by Instagram. I know porn isn't the best place to find love, but I don't always have the time to shave and iron a shirt. He irons my shirts. He doesn't shave. I wonder what he'd look like without a beard, so he shows me photos of himself when the internet wasn't around for us to look back at our past selves. I'm too scared to tell him that his is the only photo on my phone when I look at my future self. I wonder about the end of the world and whether it would be reason enough to give up on love, or if it is in fact the reason we should keep banging on about it. I wonder if a heartless body can learn to keep loving. I wonder if knowing the meaning of now will be enough to prepare me to embrace tomorrow. When Gung taught me how to use a dictionary, he explained how it was for more than just learning how to spell a word. Here were all the meanings of the world in my hand. I felt so powerful holding such nourishment. Every time I see my parents, they ask if I've eaten before sending me home with enough meals for the rest of the week. Dad moved to New Zealand to start a new life knowing only my mum. I never assumed courage could be inherited, but sometimes I can't bear to be in a room surrounded by people I know and love. And so was love, too bright to look in the eye, too bright to ignore.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So last night at the gala, some of the audience may have been there. You spoke about some work that you've been doing with the National Library and collecting queer community items for archiving.
Yep.
Could you tell us a little bit more about that? Because I didn't get the entire gist of it. But also I wanted to, for those of you in the audience who haven't seen this, it's a collection of an anthology of takatapui and LGBTQIA plus writers from Aotearoa. Chris has edited it.
Mm-hmm.
Two-part question. Tell us more about the National Library, what the National Library is doing, and why are collections like this so important?
Yep. So I've been working with Kawe Mahara, which is the new name for the Lesbian and Gay Archives of New Zealand. And they've been around since the 80s. So they've sort of been collecting materials, ephemera, related to the queer community and our history. And we are very fortunate that the National Library is the home of the archive. The archives used to be somewhere else in Wellington. They were somewhere central, then they were in Courtney Place. But they were the victims of an arson attack, and they actually didn't really lose that much. They lost sort of stuff that was out on tables, but the steel cabinets actually protected a lot of it. So after that happened, the National Library invited them to sort of host the archives in the National Library. So they've sort of been working at capturing anything to do with the community over the last 20, 30 odd years. And it's super important because a lot of that sort of stuff is destroyed or gets lost, recycled. So they collect things like posters, community flyers, newsletters, people's, personal effects like letters and diaries and stuff like that. And they tell the story of like the queer community and what they've had to deal with and how they've sort of survived, the last few decades. So it's really wonderful that that archive does have a home and that anyone can go and see it and request items from it. So Kawe Mahara earlier this month launched the first ever Queer History Month for Aotearoa. It was only the one day. They had a symposium at the National Library. We had some of the archivists talk about items from the collection and their own sort of personal recollections of the 80s and beyond. And it was a really just wonderful celebration of our queer history and what we hope will become a regular fixture in our calendars. So even though it was only one day this year, they're hoping that next year for all of July, schools, libraries, other organisations can sort of use it as an opportunity to celebrate our queer history. So that's that first part.
Thank you.
So Out Here came about because I was visiting Australia for a writing festival, and I got messaged by an Australian poet who wanted to talk to me about what was happening with queer writing in New Zealand. I thought, cool, that'd be great. So we had a coffee. He gave me a copy of an anthology of gay and lesbian Australian poetry that he had edited. And he asked me if there were any New Zealand anthologies that I could point him to. And unfortunately, there weren't. There were a lot of smaller publications in the 90s and the 80s, long out of print, little anthologies of lesbian poetry, of gay poetry, gay fiction written by men. But there was nothing that sort of really captured everything. And so I sort of filed it away at the back of my mind, thinking, oh, someone should do that, but I don't want to do it because it would be so much work. And then a couple of months later, I had a meeting with my publisher, and the first thing he said to me was like, I want to propose something to you. How would you feel about editing an anthology of queer writing? And I kind of thought, this is a sign. Like, if I've been thinking about it, and if he's been thinking about it and thinks that I should do it, then maybe this is the time and place for it. So I said yes, and I said, I'll only do it, though, if I bring someone else on board. And I asked my friend Emma, who is an amazing poet, to be my co-editor, because I knew that, A, there would be so much to read and to sort of decide, what we would actually include. And B, I just wanted someone else to help with that sort of selection and the shaping of it, because I didn't think that it should be down to just one person. If we had the money, I think we would have had more people. But we just couldn't. Yeah. And, Emma and I actually didn't really get paid, for this. We got a little bit of a grant from Creative New Zealand, and then we do make royalties from it. But, considering the amount of work that went into it, it's, pretty much a token sort of fee. So we identified a list of writers that we knew we should consider. But what we also did was we put out a call for submissions, because we knew that there would be a lot out there that probably hasn't been published before. And we wanted people to feel comfortable enough to actually put their hands up and say, hey, I actually identify as X. Can you please consider me or consider this piece of writing? And we actually had a lot of writers who we know personally who did message and say, oh, yeah, I'm this, could you consider something? It's like, great, awesome. So we read for about 2-ish years. Lockdown happened in the middle of all of that, and so we kind of lost access to libraries and had to sort of make do for those months. But the submissions alone, when we put them all together, were like 1,000-page PDF. Wow. So it was, a lot of material. And one of the struggles for us was like, we don't want this to be seen as like the canon. Like, this is what was happening in queer writing in New Zealand. Like, this is the definitive guide. Because we knew that no matter when we stopped reading and selected and published, things would continue to shift. And that's exactly what's happened. Yeah. Like, so many newer writers have emerged since the publication of Out Here. Some of them we had considered but decided not to put in because we didn't think they were quite ready yet. And others we just still didn't know about. And that's the thing about editing an anthology like this. It's still such a subjective process. And it would be fascinating to see what someone else does, and if they would take on a project like this. And, if Emma and I did this again, we'd probably come up with a completely different selection again. So we sort of see this as almost like just putting a flag or a stake in the ground and saying, this is what was happening from our perspective in 2021.
Snapshot.
Or a snapshot. So it does sort of capture, things as far back as the 80s, but it is kind of mostly skewed to sort of the 2000s to 2020, 2021, when we sort of stopped reading, because we just had to. Like, we could keep going forever and ever and ever, but it was just going to be, this huge process, and AUP just like, no, we need to put the book out. So it's like, okay. So it's the first sort of anthology of its kind in that it covers all sexual and gender identities, and it's also multiple genres. So there's poetry and fiction, essays, comics, script excerpts. We just wanted to try and capture as many voices as possible. This was a labour of love. It is one of the hardest things I've ever had to do in terms of like putting a book together, but it's so worth it when you hear about young people finding it, or teachers
this
using
is the
it.
thing,
Yeah,
because there's nothing really like this around for certainly nothing when I was a kid that you could pick up and read perspectives like this. So I hope you do more of them. I know it sounds really hard. Like, how do you decide what goes in? And
I mean, I'm hoping that someone else will do another version, or take a different angle or approach to it. Because there were definitely people that we missed out. There's a writer that we did include, but we just never heard back from them about the permissions. So unfortunately, we had to, withdraw their work. But this is such a. I think when I look back on what I've achieved, this is one of those things that I will be so proud of, because. Like you say, I didn't have anything like this, when I was growing up and when I was a teenager. In fact, Emma and I, in our introduction, we wrote about how we would sneakily look for things like at the library, but we were very careful because we didn't want anyone to see us hanging around the gay stuff in case they sort of got ideas. And, remembering, like, I would look things up on the family computer, but be so vigilant about, like, deleting the browser history and making, covering my tracks. And, what's great is that young people these days are so much more open about it. They're in places where they can, well, for the most part, talk about it and sort of express themselves in that way. It's not perfect. I totally acknowledge that there's still a lot of crap that they have to deal with, and the world is changing, and some of the conversations and the voices that get platformed make it difficult for a lot of them still to come out and be who they want to be. But, I'm glad that they can sort of find something that might speak to them in one book.
In one book.
Yeah.
And there's something for everybody in here.
Yep.
It's great. I love it. Buy it for people for Christmas presents.
In fact, and I'll mention it too, like, some of the most vocal supporters of this book are people who don't identify as takatapu queer, like heterosexual people. They have picked this up and they've sort of told me this has just completely opened my mind to a whole school of writing that they never thought they would, read, because they didn't think it was for them. But actually, dipping in and out of a book like this just opens up the world to them a little bit more, and they can appreciate, what's happened.
Yeah. Well, it's fantastic. Congratulations. We are getting close to the end.
Yes.
I did want to ask you what advice you would give to emerging poets and writers who maybe don't know where to start with getting their voices out there or getting their work out there, asking for a friend.
So the first thing I will say is just keep writing. The more you write, the better you're going to get. Finish a poem, start a new poem. Finish a story, start a new story. Because it's this continual process and this continual journey to get to a place where you then might be comfortable enough to actually start sharing it with people. But connected to that, I would also say don't ever feel compelled that you need to share what you write. Like, some people think that they have to write to give it to the world, and that actually holds them back, and it sort of inhibits a lot of what they write. I say just do it, and do it for yourself, if that's the first thing you need to do. And then maybe at some point, when you've lived with it for a little bit and you're ready and you get to the point where you can start sharing it, then you should do it. So when I do writing workshops, I always say to people, we're going to do some writing exercises, but I'm not going to force you to get up and read what you've written. Because a lot of people, myself included, what we churn out in 10, 15, 20 minutes, it's not good. And I don't want people to feel pressured into thinking they have to display excellence, in 15 minutes. I try to just manage that side of things, because people should just feel comfortable to do whatever they need to do and not feel like they're going to be completely exposed because they're forced to share it or they have to share it. I would also just say, like, read widely, go to open mics, pick up anthologies and journals and magazines just to see what's out there, because I think a lot of the time people also don't realize, people avoid writing or don't want to write because they don't think that there will be a readership or that there's no one who will be interested in their story. But that's what actually drove me to write, because I'm not that I thought everyone should hear my stories and my thoughts and reckons, but it's like I need to get it out there. I need to express myself in this way, because if I don't, I'm just going to be bottling it up inside. And sure enough, there are other people that feel the same way as well. And then that's when you start making connections, and you realize, there's people like me out there who worry about the same things and have gone through the same things. So using writing and literature as that sort of connector is so useful and wonderful. Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you. You're going to finish up. They've extended your laureateship for another year, I read.
Yes. Yep. So it was going to finish next month, but now I've got an extra year. So it'll be until August 2025.
And you've talked about you trying out some different styles, but what about other things that poet laureates do when they're finished?
Actually, a lot of people have asked me, like, what are you going to do after you're finished up with being poet laureate? It's like, well, I'll just stop being a poet. I've done it. I've achieved it all. This is just one part of my journey as a writer and as a poet. Like, I'm just going to keep doing what I do. I've going into this, I know I've only got a short amount of time as the laureate, so I just want to make the most of it. So that's why I've been throwing myself into the event side of things and sort of saying yes to a lot of things, because I know that after that, I'll sort of step aside for a bit and just let the next person take up the mantle. And hopefully that I've left the role in a good place, so that when they start, people know straight away who they are, what they're meant to be doing, and that they embrace it as much as they have for me. Yeah.
Okay. Well, I might get you to finish us off with a wee or a big one, whatever you want to write, whatever you want to read.
Cool.
I'm just conscious of no one's going to leave, are they? No one needs to go anywhere? Okay, good.
I'll finish up with a poem that I wrote for my friend Sam Lowe. So does anyone know who Sam Lowe is? He won New Zealand MasterChef maybe 2 years ago.
Oh, yeah.
So last year he put out a new cookbook called Modern Chinese, and he invited me and our friend Nathan Joe, who is an amazing poet and playwright, to write some poems for his cookbook, which, super special. And like, I knew straight away when he asked me to write a poem, I knew that I had to write a poem about my pawpaw, my grandmother, because I spent so much time in her kitchen. So this is a poem called Patience. This is how time moved in Papa's kitchen. Slow like dough rising in the sun, fast like the stories told around the mahjong table. Time was hidden in the folds of every dumpling and sealed in every bao. Roast duck, soups, and congee were all-day affairs. We watched steaming pots and quivering lids as if they might reveal our fortunes. Time is also what gave the wok its supersonic flash, the melodic clash of steel upon steel that got louder as dinner got closer. Giving us kids a job would keep us still. It's here, our oversized aprons dusted in rice flour and fingers slicked with grease, that we learned the meaning of patience, when to pause for breath, when to let time work its magic. Ceramic jars filled with homemade pickles, salted eggs, and pungent rice wine lurked at the back of the pantry. Everything worth waiting for revealed itself after hours, sometimes days or weeks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Sally.
It's been lovely to speak with you. And thank you very much to the audience for coming along. Chris is going to be signing books in the foyer, so you can pop along there and get a copy and get it signed if that's what you'd like to do. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks for coming.